Welcome to our part 2 of reading In Wyoming by Spragg and breaking down the way that this author utilizes his sentences and metaphors and a bunch of other things to really get to point about how living in Wyoming is. So at this point we have 2 little paragraphs left, and then we are going to talk about some themes and some questions. So the last thing that we had is this idea of this is the first time quotes are used. People whisper, then they yell, they slump, they're like a sloth that has ended a crisis, this posture is remaining. So now we emerge from our shelters. If it is summer, we exposed our soft bellies from the sun, gaining confidence, we breathe deeply, glut ourselves with the scent of stage, assimilating a narcotic perfume. We tend to our yards, paint our houses, wash cars. My neighbor burns back overgrows of dried weeds, heaps of tumbleweed. He mends his fence. Nice day, he says. I've heard him say as much as when it is 13 degrees above zero. What he means is the wind is not blowing. So, once again, this is another feeling where as I was reading it, I'm like, yeah, this also reminds me of Wisconsin, you know? The winters are so awful for a lot of people here that at the first glimmer of something warm, the first day that it's above 30 below, people are outside wearing shorts and having barbecues in their backyard. That's kind of how it is. So I definitely felt a sort of connection in how this author writes that. But then we come to this. So, soft bellies to the sun. This is very extremely reminiscent to animals. Once again, he is comparing humans to animals in this way, some animal that has a belly that you usually protect, and the fact that they're kind of opening up and allowing that shows that, they're, cautious, but they're, not protecting themselves. It's not that sense of survivalism that was once there. So then it says, we tend to our yards, we paint our houses, wash cars, neighbor burns back overgrown dried weeds. It's very ritualistic in this sense. It's one thing to the other, and you get this sense, we do this, we do this, my neighbor does this. He's not saying that some people go off and do this, some people might do this, I personally do this. No, it's a sense that everyone in Wyoming, once summer comes, all does the same things, maybe not necessarily in this order, but they're all painting their houses, tending to yards, washing their cars, and we kind of do the same thing. If it's the first sunny day in Wisconsin and you go to the car wash, you will go and see hundreds of thousands of cars lined up because it's just what we all kind of instinctively do. Instinct in the way that an animal just goes through, step 1 to step 2 to step 3. Because as we've established, all of these things are kind of necessary. Tending to yards, painting houses, washing cars. It's just a general upkeep. It's not like they're doing this for fun. They're doing it because they kind of need to. And earlier in the first video, we talked about how it's this sense of utilitarianism. Nothing they're doing here is for thriving purpose. It's all for surviving purpose. So all of these things that they do, it's just what the entire population does. And that also is, like I said, like an animal just going through the motions. And even so much as his neighbor here just saying nice day, it's not actually that he's making true conversation. It's just something he says. It's, all those jokes that dads or moms all have, those phrases that they say, and it's just a phrase without actually meaning anything, and you just say it. And this is kind of similar. The important thing, what he means is the wind is not blowing. The wind is gone, the one that kind of cages them. The master is not there, so they're feeling like they are allowed to come out. Sorry for that bell. Continuing on. The foolish become bold. They start construction projects that will require...
Thursday morning.
Sorry for that pause. I'm going to start back from reading here. The foolish become bold. They start construction projects that will require more than 48 hours to complete. The rest of us work tentatively. We remember we are serfs. We know the Lord is only absent, not dethroned. I pass through bouts of giddiness. I cannot help myself, but like mice and voles, I remain alert. In Wyoming, the price of innocence is high. There's a big wind out there, and it's on its way home to our high plains. So the first thing to recognize, once again, still pretty much reminds me of Wisconsin, but more not as quite the same. I mean, in Wisconsin, there's the joke that there is 2 seasons, winter and construction, and that's mostly because you can't really do a lot of road work in winter, so whenever it does become warm, they definitely capitalize on that sense. But in the same way, when it's that, very difficult time between summer and winter and spring, until you're absolutely sure, it's hard to be, it's hard that you have to kind of take that guess about tentatively, like, okay, the weather could go back to being awful tomorrow, or maybe it's going to be perfect. You don't know. It's that sense of uncertainty. So then we have right here, remember, we are serfs, the Lord is only absent, not dethroned, this really great connection and metaphor to royalty or to historical, like, captivism. Serfs, people that worked for a king, that didn't really own themselves, were always just doing what their lord wanted. The Lord is only absent, not dethroned. We can infer that this means the wind is the Lord, and he's not gone, he's just slightly not there, but he'll definitely be back, so that's why they have to be tentative. So, like mice and voles, I remind you, alert. Once again, I've mentioned many times that Spragg was definitely trying to compare humans to animals, and I mentioned it in the first video, and you probably kind of figured out that at some point from the way that he was describing how you have to live and the way he was describing humans, that he wasn't likening us to hawks, but he was definitely likening us to the lower hierarchy of those animals. But right here, he says it pretty explicitly. At this point, you're under no illusion that you are anything more than a mice or a vole, something that is consistently watching their back, remaining alert, as it says, always worried that something is going to swoop in and basically, like, make life end for you, be awful. Because at the end of the day, you and we, the people that live there, the humans, are not hawks. They are not living in union with the wind. In fact, it's all the point here is talking about that they can only really do things once the wind is gone, once that unending wind has left. So clearly they're not working in unison with it. They're working at the wills of the wind, because this could be any day and they can't really guess when. And everything that they do is a byproduct of how they have to live because of this wind, about, like, the trees that they plant or the things that they have there. So they definitely are not the ones on the high food chain, even though that's what you imagine they might be. They are, at the end of the day, no more than a mice or a vole. So then this last sentence, there's a big wind out there and it's on its way home to our high plains. This is about Wyoming. This dude lives here. He's clearly lived here a long time, and if he really hated it, he could move. And this is him writing about his home, and so you think maybe he'd want to be like, yeah, but at the end of the day, I still really love Wyoming, and leave it on a happy note. But this really isn't a happy note. It's extremely foreboding. It's that sense, and that's just hammering in once again that the wind was there at the beginning, the wind is always there, and the wind will be there at the end. So even if there's a moment where you think it might be gone, if you live in Wyoming in your hearts, that this wind, that this sense of survivalism is absolutely going to return. And in a sense, he obviously could be talking about something bigger. It could be a bigger metaphor at play here, or he literally could just be talking that, like in the way of Wisconsin, we always know that it's going to snow and it's going to be awful and it's going to be really, really cold and the roads are going to be icy. That's just a certainty for us, the same way that wind is for them. And so as great as the summers are, or even as nice as this fall has kind of been, we know at the end of the day that the winter is probably going to be really bad, and the best thing we can do is just prepare for it. So now, if we look at some of the themes, this all is the way that Spragg is trying to describe what Wyoming is. The wind is immortal, strong, and endless. We've talked about this a lot. Humans are animals. He says it pretty explicitly, but it is definitely implied earlier on that not only are humans straight up animals instead of being something more with more agency like you might think, but we are the lowest of the low if you live in Wyoming. He used a lot of lists. This is like really digging into the syntax, or the sentence structure is another way to say it, that he chooses to use. And it's not just like, oh, I want to show you all the things that Wyoming has. It definitely has a purpose. One part, I think, is to show it's just really boring. It takes a lot to read. It's kind of that sense of dullness. Like, he's not talking about all the super cool things that Wyoming has. At the end of the day, it sounds kind of boring and terrible to live there, and I think the lists definitely reflect that. It also is just a way for that sort of repetition, and it breaks up the other way that his sentences are. You definitely notice whenever he's making a list that, like, the lists are pretty important. It talks about that hierarchy of animals so that he can make that comparison later on. It talks about the food that they get so that he can show the survivalism. It shows about the trees that are kind of at the wills of the winds. He also chooses to use pretty violent words because he's trying to describe this as a pretty violent place. He's not using nice, pretty, soft words. He's using words like brawl or violent, all of these sorts of ideas, and he's never changing. Like, that's how he's always describing it. And then lastly, he uses a lot of short sentences. The foolish become bold. Nice day, you know. We remember we are serfs. These are not complex sentences. They're not long and flowy. They are very short and to the point. It definitely gets to that sense that Wyoming is a place where you don't have time to say really long sentences in the literal sense because it's such a brutal, naturalistic place. It's a place where, like, the worst parts of the nature of that, like, very violent, like, survival of the fittest absolutely feels like that's how this place feels, and the short sentences actually reflect that. That was a very conscious choice on the part of Mark Spragg. So now some questions for thought. Why are humans described as animal and a mole at that? What does that say about Wyoming? How would it be different if we were likened to hawks? If humans were likened to hawks, how would that feel? How would Wyoming as a state or as a place that this dude is describing be slightly different? And then if this place was used, or this piece were using flowery, soft language, how would your interpretation of Wyoming be? So you don't have to answer these, you don't have to write them down, but it's just questions for as you go into your assignment to consider how Spragg has taken the time to construct this idea of Wyoming that we are used to. The next video is going to explain your assignment. I will see you there.